Hello, everyone, and welcome to the final edition of the Brockton Bay Chronicles. My name's Keith. Thank you very much for joining us as Andy and I close out his first time reading of Worm by Wildbow. Andy, man, I've really been looking forward to us doing this roundtable since we began kicking the idea around last year. How about you, man?
Oh yeah, I think this will be a great episode. I mean, it's a little bittersweet that this is the final Brockton Bay chapter, but it's going to be a lot of fun. It'll be great because we have some special guests returning. Of course, no roundtable would be complete without our resident worm expert, Tony. So welcome, Tony.
Hello there. Thanks for having me again for the finale.
Glad you could make it. And also coming back once again from Australia, author, worm fan, and host of Stories Across Borders podcast, Daniel Radford. Welcome, Daniel.
Hello. Happy to be here.
Well, thanks to you two for joining us. And so this, folks, it's just what it's meant to be, a roundtable discussion. We're not going to have too many rules other than we're going to break today's episode down into four segments. And each of us is going to kind of take the lead in a given segment. And we'll be breaking things down as follows. So in the first segment, Tony's going to guide us through the characters of the story, things that could be discussed, maybe like, most liked or most impactful or the power sets in general, something, things along those topics. The next segment, Andy will be talking on story themes, whether that be bullying or the escalation or Taylor's issues with authority, things along those lines. Then Daniel will take us through the story quality. He is the professional here. He is an author. So we're going to rely on him to kind of navigate and talk us through some of the good and the bad and the other items that relate to story quality. And then I will round things up by discussing my expectations as a normie versus the reality of the story, things that I thought might happen versus how they actually played out. And hopefully you folks will find this entertaining. So other than that, there's really no outline. We'll just see how the conversation goes. So with that, Tony, I will toss it to you. What have you got for us there, bud?
All right. Well, first, I guess we'll lead with a question to Andy about what character names in particular stood out the most to you.
Oh, that's a tough one. Well, the ones that stick in my head the most are the ones, of course, that I mispronounced. So it's like I still maintain it's Marquis, but I get it's
Most people most people do pronounce it that way.
Wait,
But
is it not pronounced Marquis?
it's the English pronunciation Marquis.
The
So
English pronunciation is not Marquis?
correct. Yeah.
well, I'm glad it's not just me then. All right. Let's see the names that stood out the most. Well, I really like the name Arms Master, and I don't know if that's just because of my kind of medieval history bent or all the D&D stuff I played over the years, but I just thought that was a really cool name. Legend, I've always liked that. I almost bought an Acura just because they made a model called the Legend. Let's see who else.
Who was Tony? Remind me, who was the kid who was supposed to take over for Arms Master? The one who was the up and comer who died during the Leviathan fight. I can't remember. Dauntless. Dauntless. I thought that was a
Yeah.
cool name.
He was more like his rival, if I remember, like
Right.
competitive rival.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So
Don.
I'm sorry. I
Although
didn't mean to interrupt.
although he didn't die per se.
He's
Uh,
trapped in a time bubble
yeah.
Oh, that was the during the
because of
nine
the
fight
because of the No, it's because of the Bakuda bomb.
Oh, right.
because of. Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
so
okay, got it.
yeah.
I just had to dig back there. Anyway, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off, Andy. Did you have more names?
I really like the Custodian. It's kind of a curveball. Most of these were something very kind of there was like movement of it or some kind of power behind it or some mythological connotation. And Custodian is kind of this, what? Okay. It's like, secretary or something, but just some kind of random role title. But ended up being really cool the way they interacted with the story.
But
Awesome.
it is a good one.
Yeah, the reason I ask is because there's a lot of double meanings or even triple meanings in a lot of the different character names.
Hmm.
Mm.
And I was curious if, I guess, if for anybody else is open to everybody, if there were any names in particular that you looked up or looked into that maybe stood out to you or wanted to bring any kind of attention to.
Yeah, I've got a couple. I'll run through it real quick, I suppose. The easiest one is Defiant,
Hmm.
just because it's. I mean, it just sounds cool for one thing, but also
True.
it very much encapsulates both who he was and who he has become in a lot of ways. This idea of, standing strong in the face of all this horrible stuff, including the horrible stuff he himself has perpetuated. I quite like that a lot. So to be fair, that one does get a lot of points just for vibes. I quite like Panacea as well as a name because it's a bit of a lie, isn't it? Because it's not that well, other than all the horrible things she makes happen, it's more that she chooses, at least for the most part, she chooses to be a healer. She chooses to be the cure-all when in reality she could be so much worse, as we've seen with the powers that she actually has. So it says a lot about who she is that she chose Panacea as her name, and also a lot about the PR situation. And I mean, Capri is full of symbolism, isn't it?
Oh yeah, yeah.
The Capri's, correct me if I'm wrong, it's like the scarab god that rolls the sun or something, right?
Yes. Yeah, represents so the sun, rebirth, and creation.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, and me being, to a fault, I guess the Uber normie, I I couldn't get past the cool factors of the names. Every now and again, I might look at a name. Like I did look up Kepri, trying to find out what that was, but I'm kind of simple. I mean, the Arms Master sounded cool. Dauntless, as I said, I kind of got the image the way Wildbow first indicated what this guy was all about. I thought, oh, that's a cool name for a cool sounding character. So I rarely did I go more than kind of surface level when it came to the actual names for the characters.
Yeah, I mean, on a similar note, I do have to give a very special shout out to Clock Blocker just because it says
Yeah,
so much
yeah,
about the character that he chose his name and the way he
true.
chose it.
Hmm.
Yeah, stand up in front of everybody. This is my name, and man, yeah, you can't do
And now
anything
you
about
can't
it.
do anything about it. Yeah.
Yeah, the adults can't stop me. Yeah.
All right. Uh, and yeah, I guess for my a lot, yeah, a lot of these names were great. I'm looking into them. Some of the funny names stood out to me a lot, just because there are also still some kind of double meanings to them, like Uber and Leet, on a surface level. Obviously, you know, one Leet is generally a gamer term, and Uber became a
Hmm.
lot more popular with gamers as well. But like how like kind of the comic relief side characters like have these like skid mark also
Hmm.
comes to mind, like
Scrub.
where you have how Skidmark gave Scrubs his name is also one of my favorite moments of the story. But like, he come trying to come up with this name, like, oh yeah, eraser. That guy erased stuff out of existence. That's
Hmm.
perfect, right? And then like, oh, here's Scrub. Like, and he just has to hold that because and he sticks with it. That's the best part. Like even
Scrub's got it
after
rough, man.
yeah,
Yeah.
even after Skidmark's out of the picture, he just kind of sticks with Scrub. Like it's um just little beats like that
Hmm.
I really enjoy with like how much creativity you put into pretty much every name, even if it's meant to be something that's really silly.
Did you have what's your favorite character, Tone? Did you have a favorite or anything like that? Or is that a little too simplistic on my part?
uh
I mean, someone who is not Skitter. Let me put it to you that way.
Uh, in Worm, because like in Ward, I definitely have a favorite. Absolutely have a favorite character. But
Yeah.
in Worm, I mean, I was definitely Team Skitter all the way. But yeah, my next favorite characters. Yeah, definitely changed as the story went. So like
That's
looking
fair.
back at it, then like Imp became one of my favorite characters. Rachel is like rounding out the top three as far as the Undersiders are concerned.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll probably just answer like that. But I guess what characters yeah stood out to each of you guys? Like if you had to pick your two favorite non-protagonist
Oh
characters.
God, two.
I'm gonna go dragon.
Oh man, you stole my.
Uh, go. You could.
No, that's
Hey,
good. It means you're freed up to pick more.
you could have someone. You can go with dragon too. I'm just kind of spitballing out in the air here or thinking out loud. Yeah, I mean, how could you? How could anyone come so write a computer, if you will, write an AI so well that you become attached to her like that? I mean, that's Dragon. She was a whole person at the end of the story, so that was kind of fascinating. And if I went non-undersider, that I have to think about other than Dragon. So yeah, I'm with you on Skitter
Just
Imp.
still pick Undersiders. I'm just saying like non-Taylor. Yeah.
Okay, not non-Taylor, then probably Rachel. So I'd probably be Rachel and Dragon, but those may be obvious ones. Anybody else?
Oh man. Well, I mean, you've picked Rachel, so that rules that one out. I cannot do that one. I honestly I wrote a list. I was like, it's so hard to narrow it down, but I'll go with Amy slash Amelia slash Panacea and uh Trickster.
Ooh,
Oh,
Rouse.
interesting.
Yeah. Says a lot about me, doesn't it?
I mean, it depends on what it is that you like about it.
I I think they are both wonderfully flawed characters. They are both.
Kraus did nothing wrong. What are you talking
Hmm.
Oh, I mean that's the thing. Like he's fascinating because he's genuinely cares about Noelle. The others a little bit less, admittedly, but he doesn't hate them. He doesn't dislike them. He does have a degree of care for them. But if there's such a he's such a flawed person, but he's also so dedicated to this one important person to the point where in during the Echidna arc, he basically turns around and is like, all right, well, we're gonna face down basically every hero in the US.
Mm, yeah.
And I mean, he's got a very cool power, which helps as well. And I mean, Amy is just so very complex and interesting and again flawed and broken, which always appeals to me because I'm a bad person. And and she makes for a very, very interesting parallel to Taylor in a lot of ways as well. I could probably take up most of this podcast just talking about those two characters alone, so
Mm.
I'll leave it there.
Beautiful. Well, we'll keep that in the pocket in case we need more to talk about. But um, that yeah. My next question, open to anybody. Is like, does anyone have any, I guess, favorite like character dynamics like between two characters, like favorite or relationships even? Be relationship or dynamics, like you just like the way that two characters kind of bounced off of each other at any point in the story.
Oh, that's an interesting one.
I'm going to address this in my section, but I would have to say, if you're talking about dynamics, it would be Weaver and Defiant. But I'll go into detail later when it's my turn.
That is a good choice. They do have like they've come so far.
Andy, you got a dynamic a duo that you like the way they bounced off each other?
Well, I really liked Taylor and Rachel, and
Mm.
the way Rachel transformed over the course of the story based on her interactions, and I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that was definitely a good journey because there's no way you could see at the beginning of that story, you could see them becoming such good comrades and having this friendship, this love for each other, Did not see
Yeah,
that
I
coming.
It,
no, me either. And I might have even predicted that Rachel was going to be kicked out or dead.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Didn't you predict she
because
was going to join the nine? I think I might have posed that
yeah,
to you.
I think I did.
oh man, that's such a good choice. Rachel's character arc is just one of the best in Worm.
Hmm.
One of my favorites I've just read ever, and they do have such a really nice. Well, not nice at first, but by the end they have such a nice dynamic.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, I guess if I was to pick one, the Simorg and Tattletale. No,
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
uh, I mean, just for pure entertainment value, Imp and Regent definitely have to
Sure.
get a mention.
That's mine. Yeah, that's
They're
Mm.
such little shits.
yeah. They're perfectly awful for each other. It's great.
Mm.
Well, they bring out the best in each other too, which is interesting.
But yeah, yeah.
Hey,
And
I
then
want to go ahead,
oh,
Tony.
go
I'm sorry,
ahead.
but
No, no, go ahead.
I wanted to bring up a character that's stepping back a little bit that I'm hoping, I know she's in Ward, but I hope she gets a lot more attention. None of us brought up Vista. As I was thinking about it, I'm like, she really was kind of a cool character.
Yeah.
And also sad, so I like her.
Y-
Yeah.
Yeah.
She is in Ward.
She
Okay.
is, and she gets, I think, a bit more screen time overall.
I hope
A
so.
little bit more, yeah.
Like
I hope
not a lot more, but
hmm
yeah, I think she is a little bit more involved
Okay.
than
Well, we'll
than
see when
more.
I do get to Ward, but I don't know. I mean, the she was the child soldier. She was among the youngest in the story. I mean, her and Imp both were pretty young, but boy, the thing with her and Jessica Yamada and her trying to carry the burden of keeping the team united, and in addition to her power was really really unique and interesting. So I just thought I'd toss her out there because I want to make sure she got some love.
Oh yeah, I mean she's earned it. She's had a bit of a bleak existence, Missy.
Mm-hmm.
For one thing, her parents named her Missy.
Oh, Missy's a
Not a
cool
great
name.
start.
This is a pretty cool day. I like this.
Maybe it's a cultural difference. Here, I could definitely see that name getting you bullied on the school ground.
Oh, really? Oh.
Huh. Is there like maybe I guess cult like in Australia, is there like another meaning to Missy or some kind of negative connotation?
No, it's just it's just one of those days where it's like, oh, you're Missy. You're the little Missy. That's just who you are. It's not. It's nothing. It's not deep. It's not like a double entendre or anything like that.
Okay.
It's the sort of thing that would like when you were like there would be that sort of period between like 9 and like 13, and but on either side of that you'd be fine, I reckon. But
Hmm.
I see. Okay, that's fair. Because I was like, yeah, I'm a fan of Missy Elliott, so I was like, oh, yeah, I think her name's cool.
Tony, why don't you have you gotten anything in particular to talk about the powers in general? The We all talk about how well Wildbow made them work together, the synergy, the origins of the
Yeah,
powers.
yeah.
What do you
Actually, had
got?
two. Yeah, my next two questions kind of involved that.
Okay.
So, first, I guess the first one I was going to do was a wish list of power team ups that you would have liked to see
Oh
in
wow.
the story.
oh, I've never even thought about it.
It's like what
Oh
two
man.
power interactions do you think actually would have been really fun to see or like really ridiculously overpowered that didn't happen in the story?
Hmm. Well, I think I'm going to start with Dauntless again because he's gonna get stronger day after day, you know. And again, I'm going back to the cool name. So
Uh,
um,
it's funny
maybe
you say because I was also thinking of Dauntless because his whole thing is he can empower other objects, right?
hmm hmm
Hmm.
maybe him and Dragon. Wow.
Oh, that's terrifying.
Oh man,
That'd be sick.
Like
I'm
my
kind of liking that.
my first thought was Dauntless and Parian, and you just like dialed that up to a million.
Oh. Yeah, well, though Parian, with since we know the secret, we have
Yeah.
not told them about that yet. But yeah, Parian with the secret, that would be a really interesting pair to list for sure.
Andy, you got any faves?
I really liked Gregor's combination of stuff.
Gregor the Snail?
Yeah.
Oh,
With another cape with a team up?
Oh, with a team up.
Yeah, if you that was a
I
thing,
thought
right?
he paired. I thought Tony
Gregor with
was.
a second Gregor.
I thought he was talking about a pairing up of the actual powers, not of
oh no,
the.
just cape team ups. Like if they
Yeah,
were to
yeah,
work
Gotcha.
together,
yeah.
not a fusion of the powers necessarily, but uh,
Okay.
I mean,
No, no,
something else
no.
to
Stay
consider.
with who
But
cape
no,
team up. Stay with it.
yeah, cape team ups, team ups.
Well, I can't remember his name, but I thought he actually paired pretty well with the guy who could do the hallucination neuter, right?
Neuter, yeah. From they were both in Fault Lines crew.
Right.
Both those guys,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
Yes, they
thought
did
they
make a good combo.
I thought they made a good team. Yeah.
If you want a really messed up one that would never happen, you could do Trickster and Ash Beast.
Ooh, yeah. Okay.
And just tell because his biggest weakness, the Ash Beast, is that he's not like got much extra movement or anything, right? He just
Hmm.
moves at normal speed, even if he is a force of nature. But you give him pair him with Trickster, and you can just teleport
Hmm
this walking explosion into any situation.
Yeah, swapping them
That's
around wherever.
horrifying to think about.
hmm
Pretty
Okay, all
nuts.
right, Tony. I got the ultimate for you, Tony.
All right.
All right, sleeper and anybody, because we don't know
Um,
sleeper and whoever. Just
Just so we can find out what he does.
exactly. This is what I'm saying.
interesting. Okay. I mean, Sleeper X is pretty strong.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing we know is that Word of God has confirmed he doesn't have the power people were assuming he had for a long time, where it was just everyone thinks he's crazy powerful, but in actuality he's not.
hmm
A lot of
Yeah,
the
he doesn't
there was
have
a yeah.
the global
Wildbow did
stranger effect of
yeah. Wildbow did confirm. No, he has an actual power. It's not just that everyone thinks he's cracked.
and yeah, we do eventually learn, but yeah, it's
Well, kind of.
uh
It's still pretty vague.
I mean, yeah, more or less, yeah. I guess it's pretty vague, but we at least have a rough idea of what he's capable of, and
hmm
yeah, there's potential counterplay. Not much, but
Leaving
I'd say
is probably your best counter.
yes, just not is the best way to play for sure. But when you can't, then there's a few characters that actually could kind of threaten Sleeper.
Sleeper show up in Ward.
Somewhat, yeah.
Okay. All right. I am gonna. Well, I'll talk about it later on. But anyway, you said you had one more question,
Uh,
Tom. Kind of.
yeah. And so I guess when we think of the team ups, right? Like the dream team ups and like how certain powers do kind of complement each other, even if they may not have worked together in the story, or characters try to keep them from working together, like Night and Fog and stuff like that. What when you think about like power interactions and like how precogs affect each other, were there any kind of power dynamics where you were wondering like which who beats who in the head to head when it came to like two fire users like Burnstar and like Sundancer or Lung things like that.
I feel like you just picked three really easy choices.
That's just
The
off the
answer
top,
Sundance. So
Well,
yeah.
boy, no, I've never thought in those terms. Yeah, who wins? Who? Yeah. So, and I may have gotten this from Reddit, possibly. Weld and Hook Wolf. Who wins that?
Well,
Does he?
I think so, yeah, because Hookworm's just gonna get stuck to him and just
Oh,
swallowed eventually, I guess.
Yeah, that's he's gonna get kind of absorbed in a weird way,
I
right?
I think things like in that regard can get interesting when you start putting people against Vista
hmm.
because she makes things so messy, right? So I think a particularly interesting one would be Labyrinth and the number not Labyrinth, Vista and the Number Man
Really?
because
Yeah. Why? So, why?
well, his whole thing is trajectories, right? Or is math in general, and
Uh-huh.
Vista's ability distorts space, which is that's got to screw with your understanding of the math, right?
Yeah, your math would effectively continuously change. But I guess the question is whether his
He
power
can
would
adapt
still
fast
make,
enough, yeah.
yeah, if his power of observation would be able to account for the change in space being distorted or not.
Hmm.
That's a good
Yeah.
question.
And you could also compare, I think, Damsel and Scrub. If we're allowed to count Damsel, she's technically in a
Yeah, she's one of the 9,000, if I
yeah,
recall.
Right.
So powers of oblivion interacting with each other.
yeah.
Yeah. Who wins that one? Andy, did you have
No
any?
one, everyone loses.
Well, yeah, that could be. Did you have any thoughts on that, Andy? Any characters who another pairing I'll throw out would be, I mean, who wins the fight is Panacea and Bonesaw. I think I give it to Bonesaw because Panacea has no real appreciation for. I mean, Skitter even pointed it out. Boy, if I had her power, I'd do this with
Hmm.
microbes and so forth and so on. But
I mean, here's the question there though, because Panacea wins the minute she touches Bonesaw.
that's true.
So the scenario could play a lot there, right? Is Bonesaw able to just stay away and just send minion after minion, or spiders and that she can't do anything to
Yeah.
after, or
Yeah,
are we talking
we had that brief
confined
interaction, right,
space?
where Pansy is
Yeah.
kind of running away,
Hmm.
casually makes a plague behind her. Bonesaw is able to counteract it mid chase, and
Hmm.
it's kind of still kind of approaching her. But yeah, if the power wasn't a better pilot, what would it look like? It's a good
I mean,
question.
she could just you know poke her in the nose and turn her into a cube of meat, couldn't she?
Yeah, if she got there, but there's also the things that
Yeah,
Panacea can make. Like Panacea,
that's who I meant.
Yeah.
no,
Go ahead, Tony.
no,
Sorry.
yeah, that's what. Oh, yeah, so I was saying like she's not gonna. She usually can't reach, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, that's the thing.
But
The strikers are always limited compared to all the others. Doesn't matter how powerful they are because they have to make contact.
I think yeah, Panacea used her abilities better. She could also make minions and
Yeah,
have her own set of minions to help with against bone saws. So
Hmm.
like what kind of army they'd both be able to create, and Panacea doesn't need as many raw
it feels like a
materials.
scenario where everyone loses.
True.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Andy. You got cut off. Did you have any dynamic you would have liked to have seen?
um, no, nothing really comes to mind. I mean, you guys covered it really well, I think. I just enjoyed the way Wildbow really planned out the different powers and then pitted them against each other in the different battles.
Hmm.
And I thought that was really, I thought he covered a lot of it too. Just what where a reader would go as they were reading through it and saying, "Oh, well, what happens if these folks come up against those folks?" And then sure enough, it would happen, and you'd be like, "Oh, okay, that's better than I figured."
Yeah, everything would make sense in universe. The combat always made sense. I thought in universe, no matter
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot of creative, especially from people like Taylor. There's a lot of very creative power use, which I appreciate. Not from everybody, because some people don't have abilities that lend themselves to that, But
Mhm.
I do like seeing that it rarely comes down to just who hits the hardest. It often comes down to who is the best at utilizing what they've got.
right. Yeah.
Which I mean, that kind of speaks to something I really like about Worm in general. Not to take over too much, but it's I really like that in most like superhero fiction, right? It's your characters like your Supermans and uh I don't know, I'm Dr. Fate and all these other crazy like multi-dimensional or
Hmm.
ludicrously physically powerful beings who are like the top of everything. But and those characters do kind of exist in Worm too. You know, you've got your Alexandrias, although that's a bit of a complicated situation. And you know, you've got your Bori girls and you've got your Welds and all these powerhouses who are physical powerhouses. But a lot of the time, it's the understated, subtle abilities that are actually the
Hmm.
most dangerous and most interesting, not the ones that are like brutes and things like that.
Right.
I really like thinkers and how they are portrayed in Worm. The abilities like I mean Contessa's a bit of a cheat code, so it seems wrong to count her, but I really like Numberman's power and how he uses it, and I really like how all of the Tinkers do things. And I mean you don't see her in Worm really, but I think March deserves a mention in that sort of bracket as well. Just all these abilities
Hmm.
that are really like very subtle in how they work, but end up making characters very threatening in their own way.
I
And
feel like there's a reason to why there's so many teams have at least the ones that are successful tend to have a thinker.
yeah, I mean a lot of the best teams do really, don't they? And a lot of them have tinkers as well who keep them
Hmm.
equipped and things like that.
Taylor
I
had to
just
do it
I
all.
Yeah. To be fair, Taylor could do it all.
Yeah, true. Like
But yeah,
she got a
I
two
just
in every category by the end of
something
her.
like that,
Yeah,
yeah.
something like that.
Not even because her powers technically fit that category. It's just they assumed that because she was so creative with how she used her abilities that they're like, well, just to
Exactly.
be safe.
Exactly.
But yeah, I came to really appreciate that about Worm's power system.
Tony, did you have anything else in the character section you wanted to bring up?
Oh yeah. The last one before we move on would
Uh-huh.
be favorite just a favorite character POV from an interlude.
Strictly from an interlude?
Yeah.
Wow. Someone else want to go first? Ooh.
No.
All right. My bad, everybody. All right.
No, I'd rather not go first. There's so many and they're all so good.
Yeah, I'm digging in my mind right now. Well, frightening would possibly be what's her face's interlude during when her PRT team went in and fought Nilbog.
Oh, Kigo.
Director, yeah, that
That's
was
a
just
good
kind of
choice.
horrifying. That's the first one that kind of comes to my mind. I wouldn't say it's a favorite, but it was terrifying.
I
That's a good shout.
I really like the one where it kind of put back and forth between Noelle trying to organize her team of gamers and
Mm,
then Echidna trying to orchestrate her battle against the Capes. That was
yeah,
cool. Echidna interlude, I thought.
Mhm.
I mean, it feels like cheating to talk about the quotation marks trickster interlude because it was an entire arc.
hmm.
So it does feel like cheating a little bit to pick that one because there was a lot more time given to it. So ruling that one out, hmm, I really liked Vistas and Parians.
I'm trying to.
Uh,
Oh gosh, what? Give me a reminder of that one if you want, if you wouldn't mind,
uh,
there, Daniel.
Parians was sort of I th actually what was it Parian or was it from Foyle's perspective? I
That was
think it
from.
was Parian,
I
right?
think that was from
No,
Foyle's
it was
perspective.
Parian.
Wait.
No, it was Parian.
Okay.
Uh, she sort of because she sort of reflects on her life and like what led up to where she is and things like that.
Right.
Because
Post the assault from the nine. Right.
post Leviathan, yeah,
Hmm.
post Leviathan, post Assault from the Nine, yeah.
Okay.
Uh, it's when foil officially turned sides, basically, and
Right. Okay.
it was a really nice window into both of their minds,
Hmm.
because I mean I really like Perry, and she's one of my favorites, despite how like small a presence she often has in the story.
Yeah.
So it was really nice to get a view into like why she's ended up where she is, why she believes things like what she believes, who she is.
Hmm.
Essentially, seeing the view of someone who never wanted to be like a cape, who's now found themselves in that situation, and this like just really healthy, pleasant relationship she develops with Foyle, which is just also very unfortunate in a
Mm.
lot of ways because everything is in Worm. I mean, just is heartbreaking. But it's another one where it's a really interesting look into a character's psychology and what it really means to be a ward in this world and things like that.
Mhm. Tony, what was yours?
Um, I was really fond of Brutus's interlude.
Aw, Brutus is a good
You know,
boy.
you know
He's
what?
a
Brutus
That
is
good
is such
good.
an out
boy.
of pocket pick. It's that is the most surprising thing, but I respect it. It's written very well.
Yeah. Giving some love for Brutus. That's cool. Awesome. All right. Are you, is that it, buddy? Are you cool? Are we ready to move
Yeah,
on?
let you guys move on to our next phase here.
All right. All right. So we're going to move on to story themes and we'll toss it over to Andy. What you got for us, Andy?
Well, yeah, there were a lot of great themes in here, and you highlighted three of the main ones at the beginning there with bullying, escalation, and problems with authority. And I'd like to focus on a few different ways that cropped up. So um, I thought Wildbow gave a lot of cool perspectives on how the characters handled pressure and conflict and disruption in their lives. Around the bullying side, there was always Taylor dealing with fight or flight response at the beginning
Mm-hmm.
and all the bullying she went through, obviously. But, you know, there was also the aspect of character and integrity in that, that when someone's bullied, they have a choice of how they're going to react to that. Taylor decided to try to make the world a better place ultimately, and struck out on her own as wanting to be a cape, and things got twisted from her plan pretty quickly. But she tried to stay with it over time. So, there were other folks.
Staying with the set of principles that helped her through the bullying, and then she carried that with her on as the story develops. That kind of where you're going with that.
Yeah, yeah. So, when there were different interactions that came up, and this also touches on problems with authority, she was often bullied into doing certain things or making certain decisions or backed into a corner,
Mm-hmm.
seemingly. But based on her principles, she would oftentimes find different ways of getting out of something and trying to stick to what she believed in and what her kind of goals were, but not give in to the bullying,
Mm-hmm.
or at least give in a way that she could move tangentially toward where she wanted to go while seeming to give in or to capitulate to authority.
So let me ask you this, Bud. Did you think that the bullying aspect of the story stayed through? I mean, Wildbow established this thing really well. I mean, our introduction to this teenager is her being hassled daily at school, and as the world and the story grew and evolved, did you feel that the elements of bullying stayed with it throughout the entire length of the story? Did it ever get
Yes.
lost in the fog, kind of?
Well, it's once the story picks up steam and the vision of it, or how expansive the story is seen to be growing. You know, it starts out as, oh, well, yeah, it's in my high school, and then,
Hmm.
oh, it's in my neighborhood, and then Brockton Bay, and then all of a sudden, the end of humanity. So it's hard to keep something that's kind of often a personal thing like bullying as a running theme when you're talking about global extinction
That's true.
and focusing on all this stuff. But I think they still had it in there. You know, even toward the end, you had teachers setting up people to run different little communities on alternate Earths, and they were using those kind of bullying tactics. You know, the that one horrible guy is
Nero.
dealing,
Yeah.
yeah, Nero's dealing with the people under him that
Hmm.
aren't following his rules exactly. Okay, well, yeah, I can see you're kind of tough, so torturing you won't make a difference, but I'll torture the kids that you're taking care of. And so there's still that kind of uh, that power dynamic using, uh, superior position to kind of hammer on people who really don't have any recourse, and that's kind of bullying. So
I
yeah.
am sorry, I'm just trying not to laugh because you just reminded me of it making the guy recite the Iliad.
Yeah, Imp's response in that was pretty darn cool.
Um, but if you don't mind, touch on what you said about how it become like the thing with the bullying, I think is very clever, right? Is that the themes in Worm are very layered and meshed together, and every theme is often built into another theme, built into
mm,
another theme, right? So it's not that the bullying drifts away necessarily at any point. It's that the theme it's actually a part of expands because I
Hmm.
think a much wider theme of Worm is this idea of conflict and communication.
Really? Well,
Yeah.
I
Uh,
never thought of that. Tony, have you?
well,
I'm sorry. Finish your thought, Daniel. I'm sorry.
no, no, I mean, I was just going to expand a little bit, like all throughout uh Worm, it's a recurring thing, right? That a lot of problems would be solved, that people would just talk normally and have actual communication. But instead, everyone's instinct is often to go for conflict. And we know part of that is the influence of the shards, but
Right.
it's also just human nature. So this idea of solving problems via conflict or via communication, violence or peace, or that is the recurring trend that's present from the very beginning, where Taylor is being bullied and is choosing the non-violent approach. But it's also present in the fact that bullying is effectively just a really crappy means of communication.
Hmm.
And that's the sort of theme that continues on all the way to the end, to the point where they actually, I mean, Taylor says it all the time, can people just work together?
Yeah.
All the
Finally,
time.
we're all
Even her,
working
even
together.
exactly, even her power is making things work together.
mm.
So I think that's actually what the bullying is, sort of like a sub theme of this wider theme of conflict and communication. The point that's even how they win in the end is via communication, because and also because the conflict and communication is part of the wider theme of just humanity and otherness and unity also falls into that sort of same sort of thing.
Andy, you want to
Worm
continue?
is
I'm sorry.
about what makes us human, weirdly.
Yeah, I
Andy, you
think
want to continue on? Yeah, go ahead, bud.
sure, and I think that's a great point. Is the idea of um, as humans, we have certain things we tend to do. We have biases, we have personalities, we have fears, and the shards have, I would say, similar drives, if you will, but on maybe a little bit more primitive. It's just the way it came across to me in the book was just all of them seeing who can be king of the mountain, and it's just trying to survival of the fittest kind of thing.
Hmm.
There's no idea of, oh well, let's try to build an infrastructure to help support the weaker shards. It's like, no, I'm going to just slurp up the weaker shards. They're that's I'm not helping anybody. There were some people that, like the administrator, that their power is to try to build strength through coordination, through communication, through getting people focused and moving in the same direction.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, they're more primitive and trying to just rise to the top and survive. And so when they meet and form this relationship with humans, there's these consequences where some people just that gives them the liberty to just kind of, all right, well, yeah, I got to just survive, so I'll do whatever it takes. Other folks, push back against that, and there's a real struggle in them, especially because they don't really know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
They realize they have powers, but maybe not all the baggage that comes along with it. And that kind of leads into the idea of escalation too, where it's kind of, well, all right, I don't see another way out of this situation, so I'm going to have to be even more brutal than I was last time, or they're going to just keep coming back, kind of thing. But as Daniel touched on, how much of that is the shards and their tendency towards conflict, and feeding into the human nature side of oversimplification of problems. It's we see it all the time, and
I mean,
I
Taylor
think,
throughout this entire story, I mean, escalation. Thy name is Skitter. I mean, to a certain extent, I am drawn back to that circumstance where when she had her territory and those three leftovers from the ABB she tried to help them get work, and then I mean, she sicked bullet ants on them, despite despite the pleadings of that Christian couple. Her thing was, well, I have to escalate to send a message to these guys. Don't mess around in my territory. Is that kind of where you're thinking?
yeah, I was definitely thinking of Taylor quite a bit in that, and her progression through things. And we talked about it a lot during the different episodes, and where it was going to lead and that kind of thing. It just got me thinking about, well, how much of that is the Shard's influence, and how much of that is the fact that Taylor's in this environment where she sees other folks escalating or threatening escalation all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And as we've said a million times, she's a teenager. So yeah, I was known as there's the old line from the Untouchables, if they bring a knife, you bring a gun.
Yeah.
It was more like, if they bring a feather duster, I'll bring a nuclear bomb, kind of thing. Somebody would jokingly, tease me about something, and I would just go Don Rickles on them. For the folks who can remember him, I would just
Sure.
cut them down to the quick, and people would be like, dang, Andy. I mean, it was just a joke. You don't have to say her family is, troglodytes on top of everything else. Yeah.
Yes, you do.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
You
no,
do? Okay.
always.
No. Tony, do
No, but
you? Oh, go ahead, Andy.
Sonner
Sorry.
and Desert Media condones verbally eviscerating your enemies. And now you have to edit that out. You're welcome.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Finish your thought, Andy, and then I was going to ask Tony something.
I was just going to throw in another one of my typical juvenile anecdotes.
Oh.
So, Tony, go ahead.
Yeah, Tony, you want to chime in on escalation?
I mean, it's not much, I guess. Touched on everything, but yeah, I would just second that it's a lot of it is the idea of posturing
Mm-hmm.
and leveraging power for authority versus the illusion of authority. Because like you have the PRT, and then you have like Director Tag and Pico, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're kind of appointed, and we learn later too that it's really all the capes are the ones who have everything, right? But they are still appointed in these positions of feigned authority, and the heroes will kind of accept it, but then when they look at villains, heroes by default have to look down at the villains, kind of regardless of whatever the villains are, actually doing or trying to do. And so at least a lot of people tend to sympathize a little bit with the villains that we get their POV, like why they're doing what they're doing, like why they're trying to get the resources they need for their communities, or and also the fact that the majority of capes are all traumatized, and so it makes sense why there's so many more villains than heroes. But then
I,
yeah,
yeah, I mean, trauma is a literal prerequisite to naturally develop powers. So
Right.
yeah, checks out.
Yeah, indeed. Anything further on themes that you want to bring to the table there, Andy?
Yeah, I had one more thing I wanted to talk about, and that
Sure.
was the idea of haves versus have-nots. So, we see that in a lot of different ways where we've got Taylor's at the one high school, but there's also Arcadia High School, which is much nicer.
Mm-hmm.
There's the parts of Brockton Bay that are doing well, and then there's the docks area that's falling into disrepair, and Danny's trying to help fix that up somewhat. And then the obvious dichotomy of capes versus non-capes, and how there are groups that say, well, it's just not fair that I didn't get one through a trigger event, so how can I synthesize a trigger event? Um, I thought that theme carried through really well, and I think that resonates with just about everybody because we all are on one side or the other, and we can, in any given situation, any of us have been at a store and there's only one of something left, and we either grab it or the other person grabs it. And then we're either a have or a have not. And it then leads into, well, how do we deal with that? There are certain things that it's like, oh, well, I can do without that. And I hope that person does well with it, and then there are other
Mm-hmm.
things where it's kind of pretty stark how if you are in a certain group and you don't have a power, then what are you kind of? There's almost this second class citizen kind of thing. And I thought Wildbow did a great job of playing that theme throughout the whole story.
Wow. Either of you guys want to chime in on that? Because that
Uh,
is, it's painfully obviously
yes.
now that you bring it up, but it was, kind of subtle to me, but the way you pointed out, Andy, wow, yeah, that was definitely there. I'm sorry, Daniel, what were you going to say?
Uh, yeah, I mean, I was just say, yeah, no, that I never really clocked it as like an intentional theme built into the story as much as just a natural consequence of having a very grounded world. But like
Hmm.
now that you mention it, it very well might have been. But one of the things that's interesting about it is that he also plays with how perception builds into that, and that also ties back into what Tony was saying about authority as well, right? Because having power or authority in that way is also a sort of have versus have not situation,
Right.
and is and perception plays into some of that. This idea of I believe you have power, so therefore you do. But more to the point that I was getting at with that is that a lot of capes, especially the more heroic ones, would likely argue that they are the have in the have not scenario because they have paid dearly for the power they have, a lot of them. And the existing in the world of capes is a stressful, dangerous, nightmarish, often just horrific situation to be in that the quotation marks have nots are, for the most part, kept blissfully unaware of. They're viewing this what is in the world of the Wormverse real life through the lens of like merch and Saturday morning cartoons, when the reality is that, and this is engineered for their own like comfort and comfort with capes existing and just their own sense of safety. But every now and then an Endbringer or something shows up and shatters that illusion. But a
Yeah.
lot of the time, people are living in this sort of blissful unawareness of how brutal and dangerous and just generally unpleasant the life of a cape is. So it sort of toys with that idea a little bit as well.
Hmm. Tony, you have anything to bring to that? aspect of the conversation?
No, nothing else to add. I just agree.
Okay.
The yeah, the
I'm
character.
very convincing.
Yes,
Yeah,
you are.
yeah.
Tony, were you through, Tony? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, I was trying to think about it. I don't remember what I was going to say, but yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Let's see what has a more specific question. I guess I don't remember where I was gonna go.
Okay. Never mind that then. Andy, anything else on that subject?
No, I think those were the main things that I wanted to cover on
Okay.
that.
All
Uh,
right.
I
Okay
say,
then.
if you don't mind, could I chip one into that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
go ahead, please.
Because I do think that a theme that is often presented, and it does sort of tie in back to a lot of the ones you've already addressed, but is the worm is very much in a lot of ways. I mean, and sorry, words there. It is kind of in a lot of ways an exploration of heroism, right?
Mm.
Hmm.
I think it's a pretty recurring theme that, moral complication, moral gray areas, and how that relates to the idea of heroism, doing bad to achieve good, people doing good with bad intentions, sacrifices for the greater good. And it's a sort of recurring thing of, what makes a person heroic. Is Taylor heroic? Is someone like Defiant heroic?
Yeah, that was the
Uh,
tagline, right? Doing the wrong things for the right reasons.
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
And so I was
Uh,
like,
I,
oh, do ends justify the means is yeah, definitely a really big theme in the
For
story.
sure.
Yeah, because like T Taylor is the sort of main person for this, I guess, but there is others as well who tie into this. But it's this idea of, she is her goals are ultimately noble.
Hmm.
Even when she commits to being a villain, through a lot of her time as a villain, she is ultimately trying to make Brockton Bay and her territory within it better, or she's trying to protect Dinah, or any of these other number of things. But the things she's doing are violent and brutal, and they tie into this idea of this unsustainable escalation as well. And
Hmm.
it sort of makes you, well, it poses that question: is it heroic? She's very self-sacrificing. Has these very noble goals, but the steps she's taking to achieve those goals are villainous. So it just plays with that idea a lot, and she's not the only
Mhm.
one who plays with that
Oh,
idea.
yeah.
A lot of characters do.
Yeah, it's definitely in the eye of the beholder, right? Because like
Yeah.
certain people in our own territory were like, yeah, we respect her, and they kind of ride for her like normal people. And then of course you have the people who are terrified of her just because she's a villainous warlord. And so like there's no what like sort of one size fit all answer there. Like people you're either down with her or you're not. And
Yeah, I mean,
the same thing for Cauldron,
yeah, I was
right?
about to
Like
say
Hmm.
that.
Yeah.
Oh God,
like
Dr. Mayo is such a fascinating character.
yeah, they knew about who the real big bad was from the very beginning, right?
Hmm.
And so everybody hates them because of the things that they're doing to prepare for that eventual showdown, and they're even trying to control when it happens, and because of that, a lot of bad things happen to a lot of innocent people. But was it worth it?
Yeah,
In the face of complete annihilation of humans across all timelines or all universes.
Kind of falls under the category of you got to do what you got to do, and yeah, even my issue with cauldrons notwithstanding, yeah, I've struggled with them. I've struggled with them a lot, especially since you posed a couple of questions to me during, I think it was arc 29 or 28, Tony. I can't remember for sure, but I'm still trying to come up with answers to those. But I'll let you know when I do. Maybe at Thanksgiving this year.
Oh, all right.
Anything else on this one, Andrew?
No, that was it for me.
Okay. All right, Andy, thanks for that. And we are done with our talk about themes. So let's move on to Daniel. Daniel, what do you have for us regarding the story quality?
Oh, You see, if I had been smart, I would have written this down in questions as well, but I didn't do that. So we're gonna see how this goes.
Okay.
I guess I'll just talk and you guys chime in whenever you want. Um,
Sounds good.
the the thing is that it's actually kind of hard to talk about this one because I mean, in some ways, not in others, but
Hmm.
partially it's just because it's really, really good. There's not a lot of negatives for me to point out. Uh, but I mean, I wrote basically a dot point here for myself, which is basically what makes a good story, and chucked a couple of dot points on that to help make this easier. So there's the general quality of the prose and character voice. There is how compelling and engaging the narrative is, twists and turns, stakes, thematic consistency, the world building, all that. There is the how compelling the characters, their depth, their relatability or lack thereof, and all that. And then, of course, the sort of pacing of the story as a whole.
Hmm.
So I think it's easier to maybe sort of break it down into those categories than just to go, is it good? Is it bad? Because the
Sure.
answer is yes, it's very good.
Well, I found
Uh,
speaking for me, I found the characters, I mean, they were extremely compelling, and those were the things that drew me in right away was the pardon me, the character of Taylor and initially her relationship with her dad. I thought that Wildbow, I harped on it a lot during our podcast, much I appreciate how well that dynamic was written.
yeah, I mean, character dynamics, I mean, characters in general, as a side note, are always. This is a recurring refrain over on my show, but so I'm just going to bring it here as well to make a note of it.
Hmm.
I often say it does not matter how good your plot is if no one cares about your characters because your characters are what makes you care about the plot. And Werb's characters are very much a strong suit, and the dynamics between them are very much a strong suit. So I'm very much on board with that. That's what sold me so quickly as well.
Hmm.
So I didn't mean to interrupt
Mhm.
that and go on a
No,
rant. It's
No,
just
no.
no, please
I'm agreeing
continue.
in a very long-winded
Yeah.
way.
No, you're fine. You're fine. I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Mhm. Yeah, for me, the selling point was the powers with how creative they were. I like the closed kind of power system, like where they have like more clear limitations
Hmm.
for how the powers work, even explanations for why you can't do the cheap stuff, like, oh, I can't start a fire inside of you. I can't uh, just oh, I control iron and I can't just, spike iron from your blood or something. All these, weird little things that you like, if you're trying to game the system that you could, you
So the
try to come up
consist
with. And
the consistency across the story of the powers, and I think this is something else Annie and I time and time again have talked about how in universe the limitations seem to be almost in many aspects more fascinating than the powers themselves, and that
Uh,
I would say was a something that would point to the good quality of the story writing.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're correct. In fact, you've actually just paraphrased a fairly famous quote from Brandon Sanderson,
Hmm.
he has what he calls this like th I think it's the three laws of magic, which applies to magic systems in general, which is all power systems. Like Worms is technically a magic system, even if it's not magic in universe. And one of those rules, I think it's the third one, is that limitations are always more interesting than powers, and Worm
Oh,
has definitely taken that to heart.
well, I don't think I'm familiar with that phrase, but yeah, that
Uh,
sure does
Well,
work.
yeah.
it is infinitely more interesting to see someone struggle and use what they have to find creative solutions
Hmm.
than just to Superman punch through a wall.
Hmm.
Exactly. Like, I mean, as much as we do like there's maybe a place for those, like the open power systems, like in superhero comics and
Oh,
stuff, where it's
sure.
like, like, oh, eventually, they mustered the energy and just kind of power adapted and punched through and saved the day. But for the type of story that this is, like that kind of real gritty, uh, kind of like if everyday people got um, ridiculous powers, what kind of chaos would ensue type thing. It's a lot more interesting to see the creative solutions
Hmm.
to the people who have seemingly weaker powers overcoming against the gods. That's why it's always more fun when we watch, like, if you read, I don't know if you guys ever read the Batman, the dark, I forget which Dark Knight it was, but the one where like old Batman basically beats Superman.
No.
Uh,
It's not canon, but it
well,
was
isn't that what they adapted into
they
that
I,
terrible movie?
they kind of, but not really. It's a way different. They actually made an animated version
There's an
of the
animated version.
comic.
I want to
Yeah,
see that.
that's much better. Yeah, yeah. Because like he basically Batman has this great monologue at the end. Like, so, spoiler, Batman does beat Superman, and the way he does it is really cool. Like that's always more, and then that's what like makes like Injustice so cool and stuff like that. Just like watching like how does a regular guy beat the gods? And
Mhm.
that's always
Yeah,
a lot more fun than
I mean, where most of us are inclined to root for the little guy, so
Mhm.
it's a smart choice to put us. Even though Taylor's power isn't actually weak, to be
Right.
fair, it just appears it. But
Mhm.
to put
Yeah.
it makes a lot more sense for the story Worm is telling to put us our perspective character as someone who has to
Right.
think on her
Like
feet and use power creatively. It's just much more engaging and does fit that gritty setting a lot more.
yeah, like think of how like this was introduced to us, right? Like Bug Girl uh goes up against Fire Guy, and we know fire's generally greater than bugs
Mhm.
if you play Pokemon, you know. So it's a really bad matchup, even if the power seems OP. Like her opponents are all not good for
Mhm.
like, oh, I get bigger, armored, the bugs stop working.
I
Yeah.
Like
mean,
how do I beat?
she's consistently placed against enemies who have some sort of massive advantage against her that she has to then play around, and that does make this very engaging storytelling.
Yeah,
Uh,
like Mannequin was like, oh, like it's like the guy
I'm just
completely
hermetically
seals
sealed.
himself off. Yeah, like, I can't poison him.
Yeah, there was
Can't run off what I don't have.
for me
What are
there
wasps
was a
gonna do
whole
to
lot
me?
of there was a whole lot of throughout this story there's a whole lot of, oh my god, how's she going to get her butt out of this situation going on. But stick going back to the theme of escalation, each time she was presented with that situation, she improved her ability, her thinking power, her creativity to get out of that situation. So step by step, it was believable to where at the end of the story, she what bullies the god into giving up, kind of, and then letting himself be annihilated. But her story to her step by step progression to get as powerful as she was, yeah, I thought it was believable.
Yeah, I mean that pretty much sums up the first of my points, doesn't it? The general quality of the prose, the sort of character voice. While Wildbow uses very gripping language in the way he writes, his prose is very good in that way. The pacing of individual segments like that is and that sort of escalation is very dramatic. It makes it easy to get invested, especially because there's always that increasing of stakes as well over
Yeah.
time.
Hey, let me
Uh,
interrupt you something for a second. I want to ask Andy a question. Dan, you just brought up pacing. Did you have at any point, Andy,
I'll
any
get to that,
issues
don't
with
worry.
the pacing of the story? Did you ever feel like it dropped off and kind of lacked interest? I'm trying to think back to maybe the Travelers interlude or arcs or anything like that.
No, I mean, I sometimes, and I think I brought this up during the episodes, I sometimes objected to the interludes and how they seem like sometimes they're out of left field,
Right.
or, it's like, well, what's going on with Frodo right now? Why are we talking about this thing with the Palantir over here in the tower? I don't care.
Mm.
Um, sorry to go all Tolkien on you there, but anyway, yeah, that was the only bug
so
I had
so
about
more of a
pacing, I would
distraction,
say.
a
Yeah.
distraction, not so much the pacing. When you did get to those interludes, you didn't necessarily have any issue with how the time passed or how the interlude was presented. It was just, as you just said, I don't care initially until things kind of took off. You got deeper into the interlude.
Well, yeah, except for one. I really still, and I know I apologize ahead of time to our listeners, but the whole Parahumans Online interlude
Oh,
with
right.
the forum stuff, I was just like, oh, that brings back too many bad memories. I did not need to sit through that. Um, but that's probably more just me and my objection to uh, yeah, what goes on in a lot
On
of
the
those
forums,
type
yeah.
of
Okay.
forums.
Sorry, Daniel. I wanted to ask Andy that question about
Well,
pacing.
that's okay. It's jumping around the points a bit, but it's a free form conversation. We do that. uh, but I'm glad you brought it up because you've just touched on two things that I wanted to get to anyway. So as far as the pacing goes, right? I know I've just said it's very good, and for the most part it is. But
Hmm.
the minute you asked that question, was there any way you thought the pacing dropped off? My mind was screaming yes.
What you got, man?
Uh, yeah, the Slaughterhouse 9000, as they've been called.
Oh,
Mm,
interesting.
Yeah, that sort of the time skip into that. I mean, the time skip is the idea of a time skip is fine, but just that entire arc, the pacing felt kind of janky to me. It felt rushed in a lot of places. And because of how quickly everything was gone through, it very much sort of downplayed how threatening the. Because like think of how scary and intimidating just the ordinary Slaughterhouse 9 felt, right?
Hmm.
mm,
And suddenly we're plowing through like 9,000 or however many of them, and we're wiping out whole teams of them in a single like chapter in an arc.
Wow.
It felt very rushed because of that. It's like by the end where we're coming to like the last chapters leading into Gold Morning, it picked it back, it got it back together because
Hmm.
we were dealing with like multiple chapters in one scenario again. But yeah, the cutting between the different slaughterhouse fights and the it just it was rushed. It didn't have enough.
Interesting. Yeah.
It wasn't drawn out enough, I suppose is the way to put it. And the time skip into it was also it felt very out of nowhere because Taylor was only just getting settled into the wards last we looked, basically,
Hmm.
and the Endbringer situation was sort of just kicking off and getting more extreme, basically. And all of a sudden, we're just when things are heating up there, we're several years in the future, and the Slaughterhouse Nine are waking up. They've got all these clones, and then we blast through that to get to Gold Morning. The pacing there was not great, and I think Wildbow himself has gone on record to say he wasn't thrilled with that chap like that arc compared to some of the others.
Tony, you got
Yeah,
anything?
I
Go
think
ahead,
he,
Tony.
yeah, he mentioned a couple of arcs that he didn't really like as much. Yeah, but my question, Daniel, you read when you first read through Worm, it was finished when you read through all of it, right?
Yes.
Okay, same for me. So my question was going to be like, does because originally the storytelling is meant to be done chapter by chapter, as far as like what the general audience was doing when it was first coming out. Uh, does would a re-edit would the story benefit if it was re-edited to be more in that novel series format? Or is it still kind of good as is with the chapter by chapter releases, kind of semi-organized by the arcs?
I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed just plowing through it, to be fair. So it's hard to comment on that necessarily. I mean, I think the Slaughterhouse 9000 arc could specifically benefit from re-editing and changing it to like a multi-novel format, for example, because it would be very easy for each of those arcs, just about, maybe a couple arcs per book, but to combine those into singular novels, for example, and then release it as a series like that. But the series is so long, it wouldn't be easy either by that same token because it is such a sprawling story. I think it's like 20 roughly YA novels worth of content,
Yeah,
Hmm.
something like that, roughly.
yeah, it's
So it's a
twice as
very
like
long
the
story.
entire like Harry Potter series.
Yeah, if not more.
Oh yeah,
So
more I think, yeah. Slightly more.
yeah, so it would be difficult to adapt in sense of just the length of it, but I think that arc specifically would benefit from being expanded into like a book of its own, so we get the proper sense of what that should feel like. But I think by and large the format does work for the story, especially because it's so long. I would have hated having to wait. Like to be fair, his release schedule, he was doing two main chapters and then an interlude,
Yeah,
right? Like
donation
in a
incentive.
week.
Yeah, donation incentive third chapters, I think, was what he was
Yeah,
doing.
like he was releasing 2 to 3 chapters a week and like and writing those and then editing them on the fly. Like, that is an insane
That's
schedule.
just bananas. Yeah.
I've been trying to keep up a schedule that isn't nearly as demanding as that, if
Mhm.
I'm honest.
Hmm.
And it's hell at times. So I don't know how he managed to do that so well. So to be fair to him, it is understandable that he couldn't maintain the insane quality throughout every single arc. I don't hold the Slaughterhouse 9000 against him, especially because it ended so strong.
Hmm.
But
Well, I see where you're coming from there, but I'd like to offer a counterpoint. Um, to me, the Slaughterhouse 9000 felt like that section of the video game where you've been introduced to all the opponents already, and now you have to go through a level or two where it's all just all the same opponents, just more of them, and they just pile on. And I kind of was like, okay, there's nothing new here. I'm fine with just kind of blasting through this. So that's
but
just my little
there was a
counter.
bunch of new stuff though, because there was loads of past members we'd never met and things like that, and hybrids.
Well,
Hmm. Now,
again, that's to me, that's like a video game where instead of the flamethrower, the guy's got a rocket launcher. It's
I do kind of get what you mean. It's a lot like those like early Final Fantasy games. Like they often had the dungeon at the end where all the regular like enemies were just bosses from
mhm.
right.
previous levels to points in the game. So I do kind of get it why you would want to get through it quicker. But I think that for the way that Wildbow was writing, it was very jarring, right?
It was, yeah, it was a big shift. I totally agree with that, and I definitely agree with the points you
Especially off the
made.
back of the time skip.
Yeah.
The time skip into that did not do any favors.
What's everybody pro or anti time skip? The way it was handled. Any thoughts? It didn't bother me at all. But again, I'm not a professional writer. Tony, what do you think? Were you bothered by the time skip?
And I don't think that was Daniel's. It was just more how the arc was handled, not so the time skip itself.
No, I know. I'm asking specifically. Did you care for the time skip?
Oh,
Not to
no,
Daniel's point. Yeah.
no, yeah, no, I have no problems with the time skip. I'm as a regular manga and anime watcher, time skips happen a lot in
Mm,
those stories.
They do it. It's
okay.
true. They do.
Okay.
So I'm like, oh
Uh,
yeah.
Andy, any thoughts, pro or
It,
con on the time skip and effect
I
on the
was
story?
con when it started. Yeah, I was not a fan when it first cropped up. I'm like, hold on. I know, there was this timeline and stuff, but
Hmm.
nothing we need to know about happened in that intervening chunk. But once it kind of got going on the new part of the timeline, I was like,
Hmm.
well, yeah, it's probably just build up and trying to fortify and consolidate and stuff, and it,
Hmm.
it probably wouldn't have been all that exciting. But when I first read it, yeah, I was kind of like, what is this? This is not cool.
Yeah, to be clear, I don't have any problems with the time skip happening itself
Uh-huh.
necessarily.
Yeah.
Uh, I too am a massive weeb, so I'm kind of used to it. But the execution of where it was placed was jarring and weird to me, right? Because we are just starting to get used to this new team and this new dynamic with the wards when it's dropped on us. So it felt like a very sudden hard cut, almost like it was like watching a TV show, right? And you're halfway through an episode and they suddenly cut to the next one.
Mm.
Yeah, that's how I felt about interludes, kind of, especially in the beginning. I started appreciating them a little bit more as I got deeper in the story, but initially I was like, no, I want to go back to Taylor.
Same.
I
Was
Yep.
see.
yeah.
I really liked the interludes. From the get-go, I thought the interludes were quite cool. And that was actually the other thing you mentioned I wanted to touch on was that the way the story is formatted is really interesting, and I liked it a lot. This idea of having Taylor as our POV character for the most part and exploring her personal story and the overarching arc as it gets crazier, crazier from inside her head.
Hmm.
And then the interludes showing us a broader perspective of the things we're missing in the world, the way other characters see Taylor.
Right.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah, definitely. And like it just took more maturing on my part to eventually appreciate them as I kept reading. It's just
that's
like
fair.
initially that was like how I felt. I was like, oh, I wanted to back to the action, you know, like we just left it off in this horrible spot. And then,
And
but no,
yeah,
eventually I did start to appreciate the interludes more
yeah.
for
It
those
was a really
reasons.
interesting idea of like showing us how the world at large functions, how other characters who we only ever see through Taylor's eyes for the most part, how they actually are, as well as an interesting point of contrast. The same way they are, we're seeing how she looks to others, we're seeing how others arc of it, how she sees them. We get more understanding of just the general world building, the lore of it all, and through the combination of Taylor's story and the interludes, we're drip fed how the whole world actually works and what the reality of the story actually is. To that moment where suddenly we're like, shit, it was Scion.
Yep.
Always has been. Uh,
Anything else
Yeah.
on quality you wanted to bring up, Daniel?
Oh man. I mean, it's hard because I could go on for so long about the like quality of it all. Like I could talk more about the character writing and how for how he has this incredibly expansive cast but
Hmm.
manages to juggle them so well. Every character feels distinct with their own personality, voice, beliefs, values, own stories to tell effectively, as we see through a lot of the interludes.
True.
mhm.
And all of those characters are not only distinct, but they are morally and emotionally complicated with their own, unique perspectives, strengths, weaknesses, and struggles. And that makes them all so interesting, is why, you can get like 30 Worm fans in a room, and there's a solid chance they will all have a different favorite character and all be very justified in that choice.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I could go on, but it's probably better I don't for your time, for your scheduling.
All right. Well, then.
Worm is good. Apart from some blips on the pacing, it's really good.
Fair enough. Okay, then we'll move on to what will be our final segment. And I'll begin by saying, as I've repeated all the time during this thing, I read comic books a little bit as when I was younger. I did your Marvel TV, or pardon me, movies. Did a little bit of the street level shows on Netflix. Enjoyed them. I'm primarily a sci-fi guy. I like a good spy novel, and so I say all that to give an overview of my approach mentally going into this thing. And I'm going to talk about, when I talk about expectations versus the reality of the story, I'm coming at it from that vein. So I'm limiting myself down to some character interactions. Broadly speaking, the relationship of Arms Master and Taylor. Another thing would be Arms Master himself. I did not expect him to become such a jerk. I didn't expect his redemption arc, and I didn't expect Taylor to die at the end. So let's start with Arms Master being a jerk. So I still think back to that first section where Skitter's out in her first night fighting the human dragon. She's barely saved by the Undersiders, and then the hero guy shows up, and I'm thinking to myself, "Oh, this guy seems like he could be pretty cool. Okay, maybe he's a little abrasive, but that could just be because that's how she sees him." And then a couple of arcs later, we get him the night of the fundraiser, and she's still trying to talk to him, and I'm still gonna be a hero, but you gotta work with me here. We get his the fight with Leviathan, and we find out he is kind of morally corrupt in that he set up people to die, and so that arc boy, that kind of messed with me pretty bad. I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. I wanted him to be the good guy that the character of Skitter could eventually they'd have a mentor mentee kind of relationship.
And you got what you wanted.
Eventually, see, and I think at one point Andy and I were talking about this much later. It might have been after when Defiant and Weaver were talking outside of Killington, and at some point around that conversation, Andy, you brought up they were more like comrades in arms than mentor and mentee kind of thing. Do you remember that? Am I
Yeah,
thinking that thing?
yeah. I think I think you hit it on the head there, and I felt the same way. We talked about that a lot. How, oh wow, we were hoping it was going to go a certain direction. I think it comes from us both having a sports coaching type
Hmm.
background, and but yeah, it was cool to see Defiant. Oftentimes, when people who are super ambitious like that and get to the point where they're like ruthless, if they survive it and they aren't incarcerated
Hmm.
indefinitely, then they develop a certain humility. And you saw that with him, I think that, and I credit Dragon with a lot of that as
Right.
well.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, it took him being nearly eviscerated by mannequin. He was
Hmm.
in that house arrest scenario. Tony, was I naive thinking Arms Master was going to be a good guy that she could depend on? Well, I don't
Well,
know.
with no expectations into the story, I don't think you're necessarily naive for thinking that the hero is not going to actually be as heroic as he might appear to be.
And that's
Um,
Go ahead, finish your
I
thought,
mean,
Daniel.
you sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off or anything. I was like, yeah, you can't really be blamed that it was the first arc. It was a
Hmm.
fairly early chapters. There was no reason for you to expect that Arms Master was going to turn out to be who he was, but that was kind of the point, wasn't it? Wildbow makes a point throughout most of Worm, constantly playing with expectations.
Hmm. Yeah,
the
and I
heroes are not as heroic, and sometimes the villains can be better heroes, depending
Yeah,
on the
and
circumstance.
this time through going through this with Andy, I really tried to pay attention to that aspect of the story. And I think back to another shocking portion was when the truth comes out about what he did at the Leviathan fight. Where they're all in the hospital, where Taylor
Mhm.
discovers what's going on with Sophia, and Legend is standing. I forget who else was there. The other major hero who was there when the truth comes out. Oh, Miss Militia and
Alexandra, I
let
think.
huh
No, it was Miss Militia, you're right.
Miss Militia, yeah,
Okay.
and Legend is just disgusted by what I mean they both are. She's shocked, he's disgusted, and here we have this guy who I thought was, as Andy once pointed out, might be kind of a Batman kind of character. Maybe he's a little dark, but he's got an edge, but he's still a good guy. And the truth comes out, and I'm as shocked as they are, and as repulsed as they are. And Wildbow got me there,
Hmm.
and that was definitely good on his part because I was pretty shocked. So when it comes to his redemption arc, I felt that was believable. Andy, as you talked on, he did have Dragon holding his hand, helping the AI, helping him discover his humanity, and we talked about that several times, didn't we?
Yeah, yeah, and but I gotta say, I was surprised too. After Mannequin came after him and everything, I pretty much wrote Arms Master Defiant off. I didn't think he'd
Oh yeah, huh?
play a significant part in the story at all.
And I think that was at the point where Wildbow was still filling out the world. I
Hmm.
would say that I guess maybe Worm's world was completed after the Travelers arc, and so that was a point where I wasn't surprised. Speaking of expectations, I wasn't surprised to see people recycle through the story. Uh, Daniel, what do you think about that? My saying that because up until that point, it wasn't unusual to be introduced to new characters. It's just that once we hit the thing hit its stride, the world was full, and then we had repeating characters or characters repeating in appearance. So it wasn't unusual to see them, even the newly crowned Defiant at that point.
Um, I guess I didn't really get surprised by it either because it was just expanding out something that he'd been doing from the very beginning. Like the wards show up a lot,
Hmm.
and then the protectorate show up a lot, and then suddenly it's all of the wards and protectorate and all the villains are all showing up a lot in this sequence. And then we get to God Morning, and it's everyone's here,
Hmm.
including some people you've never met, who may or may not become relevant later. You know.
Sure. And then we have to finish off his redemption arc. We do have that battle between Pandora and Dragon, and how happy I was that they won. That Dragon and Defiant won in the end. He took a chance. He laid down the path for this battle to take place, and for him to be rewarded with the love of his life, if you will, being able to overcome this cancer that was in her and still be herself. Hey, that was a nice bow on that. Tony, you were a fan of that aspect of it, right?
Yeah. Um, I think in general, as someone who's read a few Wildbow stories, so there's so many traumatic things that happen in these
Hmm.
stories. And yeah, the victories just matter that much more when you see so
Latch onto
much.
those victories, hold them
Yeah, there's
close.
so much loss and so much pain, and it's like, oh wow, we actually.
Yeah, because it was like every other arc. I was texting Tony my first read. Why did this happen? No, this can't go down this way. And
That's
I was
why,
done.
so, to make you do exactly that.
Mhm.
Okay, so am I the only person on this panel who did not expect Taylor to die? Am I that clueless? Tony,
Um,
you said before
you,
it was inevitable. But what did I miss?
well,
Daniel,
you might be
Daniel.
the only one who thinks she's dead.
Oh well, well. See, okay, all right. Let's let's hold off on that part of the conversation. Um, okay, let me phrase the question this way: am I the only person who expected her to end up with two bullets in her head before we even move on to is
Oh
she or is
no.
she dead?
Uh, I mean, to be fair, once the Kepri thing sort of started happening, I was
Hmm.
surprised that she got the ending she did in a different way. The bullet in the head was becoming progressively more and more likely as the Kepri thing went on. But
Uh-huh.
up until the point of Kepri, no.
Hmm.
Which is what I mean. I was genuinely surprised when I found out about what Wildbow did through the Leviathan arc, rolling dice to see who
Right.
lived, and Taylor could have died. I was like,
Hmm.
what?
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I didn't expect her to get shot in the head
New main
right up
character
until the Kepri.
ages.
Hmm. Hmm. Andy, I forget. Were you said that it might have been, yeah, the Arc 30 review. You were kind of like Daniel, where it was like, yeah, she's got to go kind of thing.
Yeah, but before that, I was the, you know, total Disney naive kind of, no, it'll all turn around,
Oh yeah. Hmm.
it'll all be great, and so, you
In
know,
Worm, at that point, I'm almost impressed.
Dude,
I
hey,
was
I'm not
impressed with
gonna
his
shame.
optimism going so deep into the
Um,
story.
I'm not hating on Andy for this because I was there at my first read too. It's like, well, no, that's not how it's supposed to be. There was a whole lot of denial going on when I was reading this thing the
I was
first time.
surprised more people didn't die. But yeah,
oh
So,
man.
I mean, she's the hero of the story. This second time through and having, Daniel, you and Tony on and thinking deeper about the story, I see the elements, I see it going there, and I realize, yeah, okay. Tony, you had asked me about when I was being critical of Taylor or Weaver at that moment, right when she jailbroke her shard. What was she supposed to do? And I didn't really have an answer. And Andy kept bringing it back to Ike on D-Day and putting out those thousands and thousands of troops to storm the beaches in Normandy. What else could you have done? In both instances, you're fighting supreme evil, and for survival, And so when I couch what Kepri did in those terms, I kind of get it. But I mean, it's a superhero story, and I'm thinking, well, Band of Brothers is real life, and Worm is a superhero story, and I'm having trouble marrying the two. So that it probably isn't a satisfactory answer for the question you posed to me, Bud. But that Andy helped me get there in a roundabout kind of way. So yay.
Yeah.
And then finally, I guess as I did on this read, I started comparing as I was preparing for this, thinking about the Watchmen versus the Avengers versus Worm and my expectations of those stories. Um, you know, the Avengers had more of, I guess you would say, I had more of the traditional expectations. Good guys fight bad guys. Maybe there's some challenges along the way. Maybe we lose one or two of the good guys, but ultimately the good guys prevail. The Watchmen was that much more that dark and questionable actions by individuals. So in many ways, I guess you could say I was glad I watched The Watchmen before I started reading Worm because it set me up for kind of that dialed up to 11 in the story of Worm. Tony, you did warn me. You gave me a rough description of what to expect in the story, but still, I wasn't prepared for all this my first time around. So,
I mean, I wouldn't expect anyone to really be prepared for the story.
I definitely wasn't.
No.
I went into this. A friend recommended it to me a lot, constantly, frequently, and eventually I was like, "So screw it. I want to read something else. Sure, I'll give it a shot." And I had enjoyed. I'd enjoyed superhero media by that point. I grew up with a lot of the like animated superhero stuff. Justice League and all that, and I enjoyed that quite a lot. I on occasion I watched I kid you not, I watched the old Super Friends cartoon sometimes as a little kid. It ran on Boomerang as like their repeating old cartoons block, and I watched that somewhat often. So, and then older I had the MCU I experienced and the DCEU which I avoided. So it's not that I didn't like superhero media. I enjoyed plenty of it, but I didn't go into expecting huge amounts of depth, and I was getting quite used to it becoming progressively more samey and uninteresting. So when I was recommended this and nagged into reading it, I went in with very low expectations and was instead treated to one of the best things I've ever read.
Yeah. Andy, since you're the newbie when it comes to actually having finished the story, the most recent read, how did this play into your expectations? Do you have anything to comment on that? The story as a whole, expectation wise?
Well, I had a friend in college, so a long time ago, and he shared some of the darker comics with me, like Watchmen and Ronin, and Moon Knight was kind of an even more dark version of Batman, if you will, with some psychoses thrown in there, more psychoses, I guess
Just
I
a
should
little
say.
bit.
Yeah, tiny.
And
negligible amounts, but I guess.
yeah,
Splash of psychosis.
what's a psychosis here or there? I mean, come on, we're among friends.
Sure.
And so I was kind of prepared for it to be not, all unicorns and rainbows, but I think we talked about a number of times how quickly the darkness fell on the story and how hard it fell.
Before the superhero stuff even came into it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it was just and it was from all sides. It was all aspects of her life and the lives of most of the characters. It's like, oh well, this person probably didn't have that bad. Oh well, yeah, they did. So it just I wasn't surprised, but I was a little bit taken aback by how bleak it got at times.
Ooh, yeah.
And it was sometimes, you know, I'm an eternal optimist. I don't know why, but I would feel a little bit like, man, somebody's got to. Is somebody smiling anywhere on this world right now? Is there?
Jack Slash.
Jack.
Yeah.
I was literally about to
Oi.
say the same. I'm like, Jack. Jack's cold.
I should have said
Oi.
other than like a Joker style smile. I mean, is it a legitimate?
Right.
Is anyone experiencing normal human joy anywhere?
Mm,
But otherwise, I think it met my expectations. I
mhm.
wasn't too freaked out by it.
Okay. Cool. Anybody else want to comment on expectations briefly, real quick? Did I miss anything worth mentioning?
I think you got the main stuff. I think if I was gonna really get into it, I'd have to, once again, we'd be here forever. So,
Mm.
because I'd have to start talking about every single character and arc, and I mean, you don't have like 20 years to, so
No, we'll
I
edit
do
it
have a
here. Huh? What's that?
question for Andy.
Go
I have
ahead,
a
bud.
question for Andy.
Please.
So unfortunately for you, you were kind of time gated with how you
Mm.
were allowed to consume the story. Given that you've now finished it, how much more would you have liked to binge the story?
That's a good question.
Oh, I'm a huge binger, so I would have, yeah, been bleary-eyed many a morning and
Mhm.
probably taken, I have an unlimited sick leave, so I probably would have, yeah, had plenty of worm days that I just have to like, yeah, I can't come in. I got worm problems.
I got a word, an infestation, if you will.
Exactly.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Oh my
Um,
goodness.
it's really bad. Like it feels world ending.
Mhm. Uh,
exactly. They're bringing the end
uh.
right now. I know it. Um, so yeah, that was really hard. And even week to week, I'd get through reading stuff and then there'd be all this other stuff at the end that I could keep reading that people made comments about years ago that might bring interesting insights. And I'd be like, no.
Yep.
Oh man,
Yep.
the
Yep.
comments are a spiral all of their own on one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I
Bless
was
you,
always
Psycho
just
Gecko.
That is one of the cool things about being current on his works is being able to
mm,
actually go into the comment section and kind of see
Yeah.
how everyone else is feeling and maybe some thoughts without it being a spoiler. But I mean, I don't think that's obviously that's not a required experience to enjoy the stories. But after Worm, I went and got current on his next three works,
Oh man,
and
you've seen a little bit more than me. I've only done other than when I've done Ward and Pact. I've got a long
yeah,
list of more I want to get through.
yeah, I did Pact, Twig and Ward, but I have not finished reading Pale.
Hmm.
I'm going to start that soon though.
Oh, okay. Well, actually, hold on to your reading because that's actually
Yeah,
Oh yeah.
I'm gonna bring
it's
that
on
up
the
in
list.
a section or two. So, okay. Well, that's kind of really all I had as far as my expectations versus reality. So, if everybody's cool, I think we'll move on to questions and comments. So let's do that. Now, this first question, actually, I'm going to toss to Daniel. I'm going to aim at Daniel because this was something that we got from a contributor a couple of arcs ago. But it was such an interesting question. I thought you, as an author, you might have something interesting to say about it. So let me read this, there, Daniel. So and you can take the reply. So this is from Annorator, and the question in comment is. The first question is more of a consider the interpretation than a question. I saw this on Reddit, but I couldn't find the post, so I'll do my best to paraphrase. Consider a meta narrative. The cycle of the entities going to inhabited planets, distributing shards, and collecting data via observation of conflict is a parallel for an author creating stories, since stories cannot exist without conflict. Scion and Eden are the author, the host species are the characters, and the planet is the setting. An author writes various stories with the same setting and characters, but eventually they get bored or are simply done with the setting and leave it behind. What do you think of this interpretation? And what does it mean for the characters now that their author is dead? Daniel, do you want to answer that?
Yeah. So I've been thinking about this one for the last couple days. So heads up, this may go on a bit.
Yeah.
I'll try and keep my thoughts condensed, but as we have established, once I get onto a track, I am a bit of a rambler,
All right.
and this one is kind of tricky to answer. Like I said, I did some thinking on it because I can kind of see the parallels to the sort of different elements of storytelling for sure. I don't think that was something that Wildbow set out to do, unless he's said otherwise. Word of God, feel free to prove me wrong, but uh, I didn't get the vibe that was intentional, and that's because I think the parallels kind of fall apart with closer inspection, right? Like some authors really like to talk about how their characters do things of their own free will against it. They didn't expect their characters to do this or that. And I mean, I get that pantsers, when you're writing a story, or even those of us who are more plotters, sometimes you end up writing things you weren't expecting to write. But the reality is that we have complete control of our characters at all times. They cannot do anything we don't allow them to do. And the entities don't have this kind of control over humanity or whoever their host species is. They are simply putting power in the hands of the hosts and then observing what they do. I think it's a lot more akin to like a biologist or a zoologist giving an animal like a chimp or a parrot or an octopus or whatever, a puzzle, a toy, a tool, and then seeing what they do than it is like the author's guiding hand. And that makes a lot more sense to me as well, because the whole point of what the entities are doing is putting these things into the hands of creatures who are thinking differently to them to see the end results, because they can then take those results and incorporate into themselves to improve themselves.
Hmm.
So I think if you squint, and definitely at a distance, the parallels are there, but the more you look at it, the more they do sort of fall apart. So I definitely don't think it was an intentional thing. It's just something you can kind of piece together if you want to. It's
Okay.
still cool that it happens in places,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't think it was an intended thing, and it's definitely not something that is a strong theme or
Interesting.
parallel.
Okay.
Uh, the second part of that is easy to answer, though.
Uh-huh.
Uh, However, it's not easy to answer without giving spoilers. So I'll just leave it at, and I mean, I think the Glowworm epilogue touches on this as well too a little bit. But we actually do know what it means for the Wormverse to exist without its authors, the
That's true.
entities,
Yeah.
for them
Okay.
to be dead, because Ward exists, and we
Mm-hmm.
do see a little bit of what's happening there in Glowworm, but Ward goes into pretty explicit detail about what it means for the entities to be dead. So
Okay.
rather than me give spoilers, I'm just going to say read Ward. It's really, really good.
Okay. All right. That's on my list. So, all right. Then, let's move on to our next question. This is actually kind of, it's a bit redundant, but it's from one of our regular OG contributors, Vale. So I wanted to give props to Vale and acknowledge this question and comment. And anybody can chime in on this. Like I said, it is kind of redundant or similar to the first one. A relatively large number of characters in the book are an embodiment of specific aspects of storytelling. For example, Tattletale is exposition. When she is engaged in the story, there is exposition coming. If this is interesting at all, any other characters jump out as acting as storytelling aspects. And then Vale also says, regarding Imp, I don't recall where I heard this detail, but apparently Imp is very frequently listed as a favorite character behind Taylor. If time allows, can you think through why she is that for you? The reason I'm asking is because she's definitely a favorite of most, but she also barely appears in the story, no pun intended, compared to the rest of the characters and crew. What do you think makes her such a strong character? Just go around the horn, fellas. Take either portion of that question or comment. Andy, do you want to take a bite at this thing first?
Uh,
What?
sure. I'll field the second part.
Okay.
I thought the idea of Imp was really cool, and I thought Wildbow did a great job of writing her character, but because it she didn't occur that often, she wasn't one of my favorites.
Hmm.
Um, it just she didn't show up often enough for that. So as far as the exposition thing, yeah, I don't really have anything to say about that.
Tony, you want to chime in? Do you have any thoughts on either part of that?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think we touched on it a little bit, but yeah, Tattletale, and Taylor's powers narratively are very useful. So yeah, Tattletale is basically the character that just can give us information,
Mm.
whether she knows it, she's going to learn it, and she's going to be able to relay that information to us in some way. How reliable that information is also part of the story, but she'll tell us, well, this is what the character's powers are. This is their underlying motivations. And Taylor's power being basically being able to observe everybody. Her powers allow her to eavesdrop. She allows her to see the entire battlefield. So when we're looking at like even like crazy events like the Leviathan attack, we are basically always able to see what Leviathan is kind of doing because of it.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a cheat code. It's really cool. Uh, if I were to touch on the second part too, as far as Imp's concerned, I like to think of her kind of like the Easter egg character. Because like just think of the most Easter eggs in the story. I think uh, Imps come to mind first for a number of things, and I think I told you about a couple of them at the end with the
Yeah.
table of contents, where Imps links are either unclickable or you can't or not inaccessible depending on the
I didn't
interlude
know
and stuff
that.
like
That's very funny.
Yeah.
that.
Daniel, well, do you have anything to add to this part of this
Oh
question
man.
comment?
I mean, I always have thoughts on worms, don't I? So, I'll get the quick one. I mean, they're both reasonably quick. I'll get the first part of the way first, because I could very easily say Rachel as being representative of conflict if we were gonna sort of assign that sort of thing to characters, because by her very nature, she struggles to interact with people in ways that don't lead to some sort of conflict in some way. But arguably, all capes and generally speaking, all shards could very easily be this, given like who they are and how the shards function and what their goal is. As far as Imp goes, I mean, she's a very likable character with a history that is easy to sympathize and empathize with, that's sadly relatable to a lot of people.
Hmm.
Her relationship with Brian is very believable and compelling, and her bond with Regent is very interesting to see how it plays out, things like that. She's a lot more complex as a character than she originally appears. I mean, look
Yeah.
at her whole thing with the heartbroken and things like that. And look at the role she plays for Taylor in the final chapter.
Yeah.
As
Oh, yeah.
subtle as it is, it's quite easy to miss, but that she's there supporting her the whole time. Like that's very compelling. But honestly, I think the biggest reason is just that she's really funny.
Yeah. And she kind of takes over as comic relief, like from Alec in a sense. Like
Yeah.
after Alec dies, like she kind of steps into these like roles um more directly.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to our next comment from Megafire7, another OG longtime contributor. Megafire says there is a neat little through line in what Valkyrie was thinking about at the end of her epilogue and what we see in her in the final epilogue. What we see of her in the final epilogue. Something to think about. Also, it took both Pact and Twig before we started getting started getting Ward stuff. So, comment from Megafire. And the final contribution we have comes from the Blonde Vampire. It's been a blast to revisit the series again with you, and I'm looking forward to the upcoming finale. Now you've made me want to reread Ward. It's funny to think about it, but as someone who keeps up with Wildbow's work, it does put into perspective that since you started this podcast, Wildbow has released the last 9 arcs of Pale, had his first proper vacation since he started writing Worm,
About time.
returned and completed Claw, and is now in full swing of things with Seek. So I just wanted to congratulate you on your upcoming victory lap and for being a joy across these last almost 3 years. Wow. Well, you put it that way, Blonde Vampire. Boy, it really does kind of put things into perspective. This long journey that Andy and I have been on, and trust me when I say we really had fun with it. So with that, that's it for questions and comments. And as we're beginning to wind things down, I thought it'd be fun to ask what everybody is reading right now, whether you're currently reading something or what are you going to be reading in the immediate future. So I'll start, and I am restarting the Mitch Rapp spy novel saga by Vince Flynn. Vince Flynn created this character, Mitch Rapp. There's a series of books beginning with American Assassin. I had hoped as a fan it would be a successful kind of I mean, we've done it several times, an American James Bond, if you will, where you have this character, these novels translate to the movies get made, and different actors portray. Unfortunately, this one doesn't seem to have caught on, but the novels are fantastic. So if you're a Tom Clancy fan and you're unfamiliar with Vince Flynn, I recommend them. I'm going to read Ward. I'm hoping maybe to be, if I'm still doing Mitch Rapp, I may pause long enough to pick up Ward and do that this time next year. Andy, what are you into right now?
Well, I always have a bunch of stuff going on, and that's one of the ways I was able to survive only reading a little bit of Worm at a time. But as far as like web serial stuff, Tony mentioned a number of different places to find that kind of stuff. So I got into Wandering In, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm slowly grinding my way through that. I just finished a book called It Happened in a Tavern, which was pretty cool. Another kind of free book. I'm reading Paralandra by C.S. Lewis, and it's interesting to see a Christian author handling science fiction type stuff
Mm-hmm.
and putting a spin on it and framing it from more Judeo-Christian aspect or
I didn't realize he'd
perspective.
written other books.
Oh yeah, he's written a ton of books. If you're ever looking for something really kind of, I don't know how to describe it, but the Screw Tape Letters
Mm-hmm.
is just amazing. It's basically a demon and a demon's boss talking about how they are manipulating people and
Wow.
sending like little memos and letters back and forth on have you tried this tactic. It's pretty cool, very accessible. And then the last thing, Daniel has a number of projects he's working on, and he invited me to participate in one of them. And so I got back into reading The Child Cycle, which is the Dorsai books. Most people know it as by Gordon R. Dixon. And I
Mm-hmm.
started reading book 8 on that. So plenty of
Cool.
stuff on my reading shelf.
Tony, what are you reading these days or planning to get to?
Aside from my general list of ongoing manga,
Mm-hmm.
I am currently finishing the web serial Practical Guide to Evil, near the end of that, and that's been really good. It's a fantasy web serial that also deals with a lot of morally gray decision making with a very headstrong protagonist who's given a fast track to getting a lot of power for some to do something noble, but has to side with evil to do it.
Okay.
Um, yeah, and I guess once I finish that, then I'm probably going to actually start diving back into Wildbow works. Starting with Pale and moving forward from there.
Daniel, what do you got?
Oh man. Uh, full disclosure, honestly, I've not had that much time to really read as much lately as I would like because I've been hard
Hmm.
focused on editing my own book and my own and working on my own web stuff.
Nothing wrong
But
with that.
uh, I am always gradually plugging away at Secrets in Slumber, which is a web serial written by some very cool people I know. It's a very sort of fun fantasy story set in a town where everyone is just woken up after like 100 odd years of being asleep, basically. Um,
Wow.
Yeah, it's very good. I also, for work reasons, but hey, screw it, it was a good book. I finished Gone Girl recently, which was a really, really good sort of thriller to read. And as far as the massive backlog of things I have that I would like to read in the near future, I think, other than wanting to also dive back into more Wildbow works in the near future, Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky is pretty high on my list.
Hmm.
And so is Through the Flash, which is a short story in Kwame R.J. Brenya's sort of Friday Black collection of short stories, which I'd like to get to. Sorry for butchering your name. I'm sure he's listening.
Hey, you never know. Okay, well, thanks, guys. Yeah, I thought that would be kind of fun thing to let everybody know. Maybe we've shown some folks, turned some folks onto some different materials they were unaware of. So hopefully that was good for everyone out there listening. And so, folks, that's it. We are going to be heading out now. Tony, thank you so much for being with us these last several arcs there, son. And thanks for nagging me and convincing me to read Worm. Andy and I would never have done this if you hadn't been after me to do it. So thank you, son.
You're welcome.
Yeah. I'd also like to thank you for nagging them into reading more Worm because it means I got to talk about Worm a lot.
Daniel, thank you for joining us for all these multiple episodes. Thanks for reaching out to us initially with the way you did with the email back last year or whenever that was. Is there anything that we can have you plug while we got you with us? Your website, works? And so
Uh,
forth?
yeah, the easiest thing to do would be to just say check out my website radfordwrites.com because I post all my articles, short stories, podcast episodes, all that sort of stuff shows up there. And keep an eye out for Marvel, the next book in my sort of novel series about sad people.
Yeah.
Cool. And thanks to everyone for listening. We appreciate you as always, from the first arc to the last, from our first summary episode to now our nice little round table. We're very grateful for all the questions, for the words of encouragement from listeners. And as I've said multiple times, if you took time out of your day to give us a listen, we are very much appreciative of it. You can always share our podcast, even though we may be done. You can always share us with your friends. You can find us here on YouTube, and we've also got our episodes going up on Spotify. So thank you for listening, everybody. We appreciate it. Farewell.
And I also have to give a big thanks to Keith. I can remember the years ago before we started this, I had one of my resolutions to be a try to reconnect with folks and be more intentional about that. And then out of the blue, Keith suggested that maybe we do this podcast thing with this story called Worm. And it's been an amazing ride and really encourage everybody to try to reach out to folks and
Yeah.
reconnect and be open to new ideas, new projects that you might be able. It's amazing how virtual stuff has opened up ways to connect in ways that we didn't used to have. But thank you to Keith for kicking this off and being so diligent on working on it, all the hard hours he put in to get the stuff out there, to set everything up. I've really enjoyed it, and not sure, hoping we'll do something similar in the future, but if not, we'll at least do watch parties, and
Oh, yeah.
we'll stay connected that way. But
Absolutely.
thanks to all the listeners as well, and hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. Take care. Thanks for joining us in this podcast. We hope you'll like, comment, and subscribe. If not, thanks for stopping by anyway, and we'll hope you'll return. Music is by the band YYNOT from their self-titled debut CD. You can find more in the link down below. Catch you later.